Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I hope you can all hear me. Okay, let me know if there's a problem. So I have a friend whose name is Tomek Pietroshevich, and he would tell you that he's an ordinary man, but I call him a visionary. Tomek lives in Lublin, the city in eastern Poland where my mother was born, in the heart of the bustling Jewish section, where 1/3 of the population was Jewish before the war, where my grandfather Roman had a candle factory across the street from the yeshiva, where my grandmother's sister Zelda was taken away in a truck, my grandmother running after, screaming. Lublin is the place where generations of my family lived. And in this place, Tomek, bald-headed, round-spectacled Tomek, remembers them. Not just Zelda, Chana, and Golda, my grandmother's sisters, all of them, all the Jews of Lublin. And the interesting thing is that Tomek is not Jewish. He has no Jewish heritage. How can we remember? Cicero said, "The life of the dead is placed in the memory of the living." When I first saw this quote, I thought, the life of the dead? The dead have life? It's an uplifting thought. The life of the dead is placed in the memory of the living. It sounds reverential, to place, like it's a choice, not something that happens by chance. I choose to remember my family members who were murdered by the Germans during World War II. Of the 43,000 Jews who lived in Lublin before the war, only 3 intact nuclear families survived, and my mother's was one of them. But many Holocaust victims left no one to bear witness, no one to remember the details of their lives, how they laughed, what kind of food they preferred, how their brows furrowed when they got angry, or how their eyes sparkled when they looked at their children. There's no one left to fill out a page of testimony to add to the 4.6 million already collected by Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Israel. Yad Vashem, it literally means a place and a name. They're trying to collect as many names as possible and to give a place to those with no tombstones. I worked for a brief time in the Hall of Names at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, alongside multilingual Holocaust survivors who treated their work with reverence. Together in a large dark room filled with tables, we pored over pages of testimony, one-page memorials to lives that might have otherwise left no trace. Survivors and descendants filled out those pages. Some of you might have filled out pages like that, with whatever information they knew, a name, the name of the parents, maybe the circumstances of the death if they knew it, and sometimes they would attach a photograph. One day we were told that pictures were needed for a new children's memorial that they were going to construct. Some of you may have seen that memorial. It's no longer new. We need to find a bunch of photographs of children of different ages from different countries, they told us. So after a while, we found ourselves immersed in this task. I found a boy from Romania, Mar Moskovitz might have called out. Here is a baby from Łódź, Geweret Wasserman might have added to the pile. At a certain point, I stopped. What were we doing? Even with the names, we had forgotten, or at least I had, that these photographs were all victims, all lives that had been brutally cut short. We were relating to them as photographs, as the sought-after prize in a kind of macabre scavenger hunt. I had lost sight for a few minutes of the lives of the dead, even with their names to help place them in my memory. My friend Tomek is giving a place to those who have no name. He's the founder and director of Bramagrodzka Teatr NN in Lublin, a cultural institution and theater dedicated to preserving the memory of the Jews of Lublin. NN, nomen nescio, or name unknown in Latin, stands for all those whom we want to remember, even though we may never know their names. Tomek says he came to dedicate his life to this work when Jewish children started coming to him. So what do I mean Jewish children started coming to him? That sounds strange, right? When Tomek was in elementary school, he had an elderly teacher who told the class that during the war she had seen a small Jewish boy being dragged to his death, and that within 5 minutes his hair turned white. As an adult, Tomek remembered this story, but when he asked his classmates, none of them did. His teacher was long dead, and he realized that he was the only one left alive to bear witness to this little boy's life. This little boy, we don't know his name. All we know is that his hair turned white before he died, and Tomek's teacher saw it and told her class, and Tomek remembered it. Do we dismiss this story because we know so little? Do we choose to forget this little boy because we don't know his favorite color, or whether he was afraid of dogs, or if he dreamed of growing up to be a fireman? Think about your grandparents. If you're lucky, you have fond memories of spending time with them. You know their names and remember stories about them. Now, what about your great-grandparents? What do you have from them? Maybe a name, maybe something else like a locket. But I guess whatever you have, that thing feels precious. Those of us who do genealogy trace our family trees back beyond the stories, before surnames even. And holding on to something, a name, a wisp of a life, feels reverential. Until this year, this is what I knew about my great-aunt Zelda. She was born in 1919, she had red hair, she was unmarried, and she was taken away in a truck. But this year, while reading my aunt's memoir for the first time, I learned something else. Zelda sang and played the guitar beautifully. I told my brother, who among other things is a composer, that perhaps his musical abilities came from her. Now, knowing this information, of course, changes nothing about Zelda's fate, but it makes me feel closer to her, like I've reclaimed a part of my past that was lost too soon. Zelda was born the same year as my father, and he died only 3 years ago at age 93. She never made it to age 24. Fragments, like Zelda's singing ability or the image of the boy with the white hair, feel precious, like fleeting pieces of something you wish you could grasp more of. There are some stories, though, that come to us not as fragments, but in a fuller form, memoirs or diaries in which we can immerse ourselves, accounts rich in detail in which we can immerse ourselves. I'm lucky because both of my parents wrote memoirs of their wartime experiences. From her memoir, Dry Tears, I know that my mother was born Hela Bawnik in Lublin, Poland. She was born on number 1 Shiroka Street in the poor Jewish section. I know that by the time the war broke out in 1939, my grandfather had done well at his candle factory and moved the family to a more comfortable home on Piarska Street in the desirable mixed part of Lublin, where Jews and Christians lived together. I know that after the Germans invaded, they started placing restrictions on the Jews. My mother and her sister were not allowed to attend school. Everyone in the family was required to don the Star of David on their sleeves, identifying them as Jewish, though my grandfather, who looked typically Polish, not Jewish, sometimes refused to do so. I know that all Jews were forced to move to the ghetto in the Podzamcze, or under the castle area, the poor Jewish area that my mother's family had left years before. I know that my grandmother worked as a maid for a German family while they were living in the ghetto, and that one day her employer warned her that the ghetto was to be liquidated that night, and that all Jews were to be deported. She told my grandmother, "Believe me, deportation is bad. Save yourselves." So that night they hastily gathered what possessions they could and moved into hiding in my grandfather's factory. My grandfather decided that my mother and her sister would be safer with false Catholic identities outside of Lublin. Soon after this, my mother was transformed with false papers into the Polish Catholic girl, Krysia Bloch. I know that to survive, she had to learn Catholic prayers and how to act in church. I know that as a shy, skinny 12-year-old girl who was keeping a secret that meant life or death for her family and for the Polish family sheltering them, she sold rolls that her mother baked in the basement at night in the market in Kielce with the other Polish women. I know that she worried that she had given away her family's secret when she questioned her playmate, who was so sure that Jews made matzah out of Christian children's blood. Personal memoirs are an invaluable source of information about the Holocaust. Diaries written during the war, such as Anne Frank's, or recollections set down many decades later, such as my mother's dry tears, speak to us because of their authenticity, their raw humanity, and their detail. Of course, memoirs, like any human memory, are subjective. What's included in them and what's left out depends on who is writing them, when they are written, why they are written. A person may not be able to face certain things that happened to her during the war. Perhaps she does not want to speak ill of deceased family members. She might be ashamed of something she or another family member did, and so might not want to emphasize that. Some people are more reliable observers of human nature than others, or are more intuitive. When I say that memoirs are a more complete window into the Holocaust experience than fragments, I don't mean that they provide a perfect picture of any one life, or a totally reliable one, but rather that they allow a fuller picture and enable us a chance to carry the stories into the next generation and honor the experiences of those who set them down on paper. They're not perfect, just as no human being is. We can choose to value them and embrace the incompleteness inherent within them. A teenager's account of hiding in a bunker, my mother's description of sitting in a church in Otwock, eating a forbidden piece of bread she bought because she was hungry, are windows into the experience of the Holocaust that are more complete than fragments, and they provide human and narrative elements absent from mere facts and figures. Because just the facts, ma'am, is certainly not satisfying. I went to the death camp Belzec, and someone who did not have that important balance of head and heart so necessary when guiding through the death camps of Poland gave me the tour. He was matter of fact. And this is where the trains came in, and the prisoners were offloaded, and then they were gassed. And I stood in this place that was created for no other purpose than murdering Jews, where some of my own relatives may have taken their last breaths, and I felt nothing. And I wished that I had come on my own and sat in silence. It wasn't that the information that the guide had shared was incorrect, but I wanted to feel the humanity of the hundreds of thousands who had perished there. At the very least, I wanted the facts delivered with some heart. Not many people can integrate the stories and the facts in a genuine way. Robert Kuwalik was such a man. Robert, like Tomek, a non-Jewish Pole, was dedicated to preserving Jewish memory. He was the world's expert on the Belzec and Majdanek death camps. He knew all the facts, which transport came from where, when, and he knew the stories. He had met many survivors and read all the testimonies. I regularly visit Poland, bringing small group study tours there through Bridge to Poland that Ellen mentioned in her introduction. And when we went to Majdanek, Robert would give us a tour of the camp that brought us into the life of the camp through individual experiences. Sometimes there would be Israeli groups visiting at the same time, and I would translate for Robert what the Israeli guides were saying. They often gave erroneous information. For example, in one instance, talking about a different camp while at Majdanek. The last time I was with him there, it was March 2014. We were standing outside some barracks where Jewish prisoners had been housed, if you can call existing in those cramped, inhumane conditions being housed. And Robert had just told the story of a man who had been allowed to keep his coat on his first night in the camp, and when he woke up in the morning, his coat had frozen to the ground. The Israeli group approached the barracks, and the guide said to them, "We won't go in there, it's not so authentic. We're going to go to Auschwitz tomorrow, and that's much more authentic." And I translated the comment to Robert, who could not believe it. We just stood there. What is not authentic about a place that is so cold that a man's coat froze to the ground? What is not authentic about a place that is the exact building in which prisoners lived in sweltering heat and freezing cold without proper sanitation or nutrition? What is not authentic about a place where my grandmother's sisters and brother may have taken their last breaths? And I said to Robert, the survivors are almost gone. And in another 50 years, the people like you, the people who know the stories, who really know, who really get it, you'll be gone as well. And then what will happen? He agreed and even repeated our conversation to others. Little did I know that in a few short months, this intelligent, compassionate man, this bridge between the dead and the living, would be gone himself. Robert Kuwalik died at the age of 47 on June 5th, 2014. Now he becomes another person whose story it is my honor to tell. His life has been placed in my memory. For me, part of honoring him is figuring out a way to tell the stories without distorting the truth. There are lots of ways that the truth can get distorted. The most egregious way, of course, is by outright Holocaust denial. But perhaps that's easier to guard against than the other forms of distortion. People may leave things out because of impatience or a lack of sensitivity or a desire to stick to a schedule. Sometimes people have a certain narrative in mind when giving a tour, for example. I've been witness to people giving tours at Auschwitz who are trying to emphasize the importance of the state of Israel or tell the stories of Polish political prisoners, downplaying the Jewish lives lost there. tours skewed to meet agendas. A more subtle form of distortion is through stereotype. If we refuse to read history with an open mind, we will miss the nuance of the individual experience. People often think of Jews during the Holocaust only as victims, going like sheep to the slaughter. But what about Tuvia Bielski, the charismatic Jewish leader whom my mother wrote about in her book, Defiance? Together with his brothers, Bielski saved over 1,200 Jews in the forests of Belarus. Germans are typically described as supremely organized. Perhaps they were, usually. But in my aunt's memoir, she describes how her German boss's laziness saved her life. She worked for the Ostbahn as a cashier in a German club for officers while passing as a Pole. He neglected to scrutinize her documents too closely and thus did not see the letters that she had written to her Jewish POW boyfriend. I've often heard people say, all Poles are anti-Semites. But there were thousands of Poles who risked their lives to save Jews during the war, and many paid with their own lives. The Ulma family is one example. Victoria and Yusef Ulma and their 7 children were murdered along with the Jews they were sheltering when they were denounced. We must be open to the exceptions, the unexpected stories. Otherwise, as these events become more distant, the rich details of true Holocaust experiences could be dismissed as false. I heard a story of a survivor who came to Auschwitz and told the guide that his fillings had been given to him by an SS dentist. Robert Kowalik told me a woman in Majdanek ordered a chicken dinner to be brought to her from an outside restaurant. My own grandfather got my great-uncle out of Majdanek with a bribe. Any of these situations are so fantastical that in the future someone might say of them, impossible, that could never happen. But they did. And if we lose the precious details of these incidents, we lose part of the humanity of what happened to those who perished and those who survived. But to avoid distortion and generalization, to cherish those details is challenging. Even I, with all my good intentions, distort the truth. I went to law school in the South, in North Carolina, and they have these long freight trains there that go on forever. So one day I had to wait while one of these long trains was going by, and as the cars were going by, Holocaust imagery popped into my head, and I was imagining people being shipped to their deaths and getting more and more anxious. And I thought, okay, when I get home tonight, I'm going to call my mother, and she's going to understand this feeling that I'm having. But when I called her, she said to me, you know, it is interesting. I always loved the sound of a train because I knew my father would come to take me with a train. So for me, a train was a symbol of hope. So here I was, faced with this absurd situation of having this probably media-induced stereotypical reaction to a train, me, not the Holocaust survivor, while my mother, the actual Holocaust survivor, had a completely different reaction to the same thing, actually the opposite reaction. So does that mean I was wrong? I don't think so. I made an assumption about what my mother's reaction would be, but that's not the same thing as being outright wrong or making something up. There's probably another survivor out there that would have shared my reaction upon seeing the train. There are many possible responses, just as there are many possible experiences. And I think what's important for the future is to stay aware of the range of those possibilities. I'm reminded of another unusual association that my family has with the Holocaust, and that involves dogs. In most Holocaust movies, German shepherds are associated with Germans. You see German shepherds with Germans when Jews are loaded on and off trains and when they're forced from their homes. My mother's family had a German Shepherd as a pet. Her name was Donna. I don't know the details, but she supposedly saved my grandmother's life during the war by jumping on an armed man who broke into the candle factory while my grandmother was there alone. So we have always had a positive association with German Shepherds in our family. It's 2016. Over 75 years have passed since the beginning of the Holocaust. I wonder how much nuance will be retained 100 years from now, in 2116. Will the idiosyncratic details of stories that don't fit stereotypes survive the passage of time? Luckily, we have many oral histories and memoirs, though of course in 100 years you won't be able to ask survivors or even their children or grandchildren any questions. I used to think that Robert Kuwalik, my historian friend, the expert on Belzec and Majdanek, who died in 2014, would always be there, that I could always ask him about a detail about my mother's family, or a story about Lublin's Jews, or a fact about Majdanek. But now he's gone, and with him a wealth of information that he carried in his memory but never wrote down. But it was more than that. He carried so many facts in his head woven in with the stories, a richness filtered through his own empathic personality. Perhaps people think that survivors will always be here to ask. They're disappearing so gradually that one day we'll turn around and the only survivors left will be those who were babies during the war, too young to remember anything. And then the mantle will pass to us, the children of survivors. And then people will ask us for the stories of our parents until suddenly one day we'll be gone. And then people will look to our children and ask, what stories do you remember from your grandparents? We're lucky that many survivors have set down their memories on paper or on film. We have to hope that in 2116, people will be interested enough to seek out those resources. If the oral histories or the memoirs exist and no one accesses them, then does the memory really survive? There's another worry that I have, and that's the impulse of lumping every genocide together, as if the Holocaust is not worth talking about on its own. I've been to many talks about the Holocaust or seen courses or seminars where the Holocaust was mentioned with other genocides. I'm not saying that it's not valuable to compare genocides and to see what they have in common, or sometimes to talk about them together. But if we feel that we must always utter Holocaust, Darfur, Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Armenia, Nanking, in one breath, are we not denying each of these atrocities its own individuality, its own space? Just as we want to give the victims each their own space, do we not want to do the same with the genocides themselves? It feels exploitative of the other genocides, as if we need Rwanda and Darfur to make anyone care about the Holocaust, or vice versa. This year I attended Tufts graduation, and one of the people receiving an honorary degree was Margot Stern-Strom, the founder of Facing History and Ourselves. Margot created Facing History in 1988 to raise awareness of the Holocaust when she discovered it was not being taught in schools. Yet on that stage, as she was awarded this honorary degree, though her organization was mentioned, the word Holocaust was not uttered. How could this be? The avoidance that she had set out to combat was still subtly present. The space for the word Holocaust was absent. Why? Some might think that we should be done with the sadness. Why dwell in this pain all the time? Why bring it up at a happy event like a graduation? I've run into people asking versions of this question a lot, from a German guy I met in line at the airport in Warsaw, to several Israelis, to a Reform rabbi in Boston. Why don't we move on, they ask. Why are there so many Holocaust movies on TV? Why should our young people dwell in victimhood? If you asked me these questions 10 years ago, I might have said these lives were brutally cut short in what Holocaust scholar Yehuda Bauer calls an unprecedented way. And they have no voice, so we are called on to be their voice. I might have put a lot of focus on the way those lives were cut short, on the brutality of their deaths. And maybe in so doing, I would have, in a sense, been dwelling in victimhood. I still do believe all that the unprecedented nature of the deaths and the fact that so many lives left no one to remember them makes the task of remembrance vital. But my focus has shifted. Now, if you ask me, why do you want to dwell in victimhood? I will answer, I don't. When I remember the Holocaust, I don't feel I am dwelling in victimhood. I want to remember the lives of those who perished. People sometimes associate remembrance with being stuck in the past. But really we get stuck when we stop grieving too early. And no one can tell us when the time is right to stop. It's different for each of us and for each situation. I recently lost a friend from high school who was very important in my life. His name was David Rose. Since his death, I have learned a lot about grief. One of the most important things I heard was from David Kessler, an expert on healing from loss. He said, if you have 1,000 tears to cry, don't stop at 500. People get uncomfortable with grief, with tears. Some people want to attribute my sadness about David to my father's death, and I have to just politely say, no, I'm grieving for my friend. I think there's an analogy to be made here to the Holocaust. How many millions of tears must be shed for all those deaths? Who gets to say when it's enough? I'm glad that my heart is still moved by seeing the children's shoes in Auschwitz. I'm glad that I'm not made of stone. Our tears and our memories honor those who have passed. Preserving people's stories, uttering their names, are ways to honor them. It's human nature to want to be remembered. Yad Vashem gives out a bookmark. I have some on the back table if you want to take them, that quotes a man's last letter from 1941. I should like someone to remember that there once lived a person named David Berger. Remembering a person, their story, their name, or some small thing about them is a way of honoring them. No single one of us can carry all those lives alone, and there are moments when we choose to remember together. Memorials are a way that we attempt collective remembrance. When a monument is out in shared space for the public to experience, it has the potential to bring us together in our collective grief or collective remembrance in a way that reading a memoir or looking up facts cannot do. At the Umschlagplatz, the site in Warsaw where the Jews were gathered before being deported, there is a monument that simply lists all the possible first names of Jews. There are Yiddish and Polish names there. I have found all of my relatives' names. Another memorial that I find moving is set in Kielce. It was what was once the entrance to the ghetto. It depicts a menorah slowly disappearing into the ground, or I imagine it as slow, the monument is not moving, or perhaps rising out of the ground, depending on your perspective. It could be a monument of despair or of hope. In the Galicia Museum in Krakow, where we go with all my Bridge to Poland groups, there is a photograph from a town called Stare Dzików of a field, and in the middle of it, a section of grass. Crops are planted in the field, But where the grass grows, nothing is planted. That area used to be a Jewish cemetery. There is no sign, no fence, no prohibition, just a knowledge that this area, surrounded by plowed fields, will not be touched, that it is somehow sacred land, though the tombstones have long since been scavenged. Sometimes an experience can be the most powerful way into collective memory. Remember my friend Tomek, who I described as a visionary? Part of the reason that I use that word is because he has a unique ability to create participatory experiences of collective remembrance. Remember I told you that Jewish children started coming to Tomek. Another child who came to him is Henyo Żytomierski. Henyo's father took a photograph of him every year. This is the last picture. It was taken in July 1939 when Henyo was 6 years old. Henyo was happy that day because he had just learned to ride a two-wheeler. After this photo was taken, Henyo was moved to the ghetto in Lublin and sometime later taken to the death camp, Majdanek. Every year on April 19th, Poland's Holocaust Remembrance Day, people gather in Lublin at the place where this photograph was taken. They walk to where Henyo's family lived, and then to where a lamp is kept burning 24 hours a day in memory of the Jews. And then everyone is invited to write a letter to Henyo. People write letters, fold them, put them in an envelope, address them, put a stamp on them, knowing that those letters will all be returned to sender because no such person exists anymore. Another experience that Tomek created is an installation inside one of the barracks at Majdanek dedicated to the children of Majdanek. It is called Primer because the first words that most children learn in school may be boy, dog, girl, pencil. But the words that children in Majdanek learned were words like selection, gas chamber, transport, crematorium. There are many parts to this powerful exhibit, but I want to share one piece in particular. Upon entering the dark, musty barracks, sweltering hot in summer and freezing cold in winter, visitors hear a haunting Polish lullaby sung by a child, a lullaby that all Poles know. Part of it goes like this. Once upon a time there was a princess. She fell in love with a musician. The king gave a wedding party. That's the end of the story. Now, Majdanek was the repository for the shoes from Sobibor, Belzec, and Treblinka before they were sent to Germany. When the camp was liberated in 1944, the Russians found over 900,000 pairs of shoes, and so they grossly overestimated the number of people who had been murdered there. But I want to tell you about one shoe. In a girl's shoe in Majdanek, there was a note found written by a 9-year-old girl named Elzhunia. She writes that the words are to be sung to the tune of the lullaby we heard at the beginning, but the words are, once there was a girl, Elzhunia, who was going to die alone. Her daddy was in Majdanek, and in Auschwitz was her mom. And I just want to play for you the two versions of that lullaby. So first you'll hear the regular Polish version and then the Elzhunia.
Była sobie raz królewna, pokochała grajka. Król wyprawił im wesele i skończona bajka. La 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 la. Była sobie raz sama, bo jej tatuś na Majdanku w Oświęcimiu mama. La 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 la. La 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 la.
How do we remember? How can we remember? How does this change as the number of survivors diminishes? When I ask these questions, it brings up fears. I'm afraid of distortion, intentional and by happenstance. I'm afraid of laziness and apathy, and of lumping the Holocaust together with other genocides. And I fear the slow erasure that can happen over time, so slow that it's barely noticeable. And yet, even with these fears, I have hope. I have hope because of Stare Dzieków, the Polish town where no one plants anything in the area where there used to be a Jewish cemetery. I have hope because every year people write letters to Henio. And I have hope because we are in this room asking these questions today. There are many ways to remember. All we need is the desire to do it. We can remember by learning as many facts as possible. Only 3 intact families survived out of 43,000 Jews in Lublin. We can remember by collecting as many names as possible. Henio Żytomierski, Robert Kuwalek, Elżunia. We can remember by preserving stories, like my mother's. And we can remember through fragments. I don't know a lot about Henio Żytomierski, but I choose to remember him and how happy he was to have learned to ride a bicycle. I don't know a lot about my great-aunt Zelda, but I choose to remember her. I don't even know the name of the boy with the white hair, but I choose to remember him. It's hard to balance not wanting to distort the truth on the one hand and accepting that we will never know everything on the other. The wisps of life that have come to me through my mother, through Tomek, through Robert Kuwalek, though small, are precious, and I choose to place them in my memory. And I invite you to place the lives of these people, or anyone you are called to remember, in your memories as well. You have the right and the choice to remember. I want to leave you with one more story. My mother interviewed a woman I'll call Rachel, but really I don't know her name, who was in a camp. She had a friend in the camp who was very sick and was in the infirmary. Rachel was sent on a work detail, and on the side of the road she saw a rare sight, a miracle really, a withered bush and on it a single raspberry. She had not seen fresh fruit in years. She was starving. She picked up the raspberry and, instead of eating it herself, wrapped it in a leaf, concealing it from the guards, and put it in her pocket. She kept it the whole day, saving it for her friend in the infirmary. By the time she placed it in her friend's hand, it was all smushed, of course. But this act of kindness, this maintaining of humanity in the face of the ultimate evil, is a gift that Rachel gave not only to her friend, but to all those who remember this story. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, we have some time.
When you take these trips to Poland, do you go to the part of Poland that's in Ukraine now? Because my mother is from Poland. And now, wherever she came from, Street, is in the Ukraine.
Yeah, I have not done that, but I'm going to Poland in a few weeks, and I'm probably going to be going to Lviv to check that out, because a lot of people. Oh, yeah. She asked if I take groups to the part of Poland that's in Ukraine now, and I said I have not done that up till now, but in the future I probably will be doing that. So if you want to put your name on my mailing list, stay tuned.
I enjoyed your comments about the absence of your feeling of victimhood. It's a pleasure to hear that. Instead, I sensed a pride of survivorship without guilt. And I think it's about time that more people started feeling that.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I wasn't here at the beginning, but do non-Jews go on your trip as well? Or is it...
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think the conversation is very rich when it's Jews and non-Jews together, because one big focus that I have on the trip is how non-Jews are commemorating Jewish life, and also Jewish life in Poland in the context of it being a Catholic country. And we look at Polish history as well as Jewish history, so.
And have you visited, there's a new center for Jewish history, and isn't there in...
You mean the Polish Jewish History Museum, Poland? Oh yeah, we go there on every trip, yeah.
So my mother lived in Warsaw till she was 16, and she left in 1929. And the part of the war, she lived in the Warsaw Ghetto. But that has been destroyed from what I understand.
But you said she left in 1929?
29.
So there was no ghetto. And you mean she lived in what later became the ghetto?
Exactly.
Oh.
Sorry, I should have said that. So what later became the ghetto, what I understand is it was totally destroyed.
Well, there are little fragments, I guess, left. So you can see little bits of it, and you can, yeah, most of it is destroyed.
So if I traveled there, would I be able to get any sense of where she had lived?
Yeah.
That's always been my question.
You'd get a sense. They're little pieces of wall, and then, the guide that I use in Warsaw is really good at giving people an idea of what it was like, But yeah, most of it was destroyed. I think someone else over. No? Okay.
What about Jewish history in school curricula in Poland?
Well, now that there's the new Polish Jewish History Museum, Poland, a lot of students are brought there, which is really good. But my understanding is that it depends a lot on the teacher. Some teachers are really enthusiastic about teaching about Jewish life and about the Holocaust. There happens to be a teacher in Lublin, I didn't even know her, and she's been doing this for a while, who uses my mother's book, Dry Tears, to teach about, Jews. And so you get these people that are enthusiastic about it, but it's kind of hit or miss. I recently was talking to someone who said they seem to always not get up to the Second World War. Oh, we ran out of time in history, sorry. So I don't know exactly, I'm not an expert on that.
800 years of Jewish history in Poland.
More, yeah.
They didn't get to the war. What about the other 800 years? And also something that surprises me, that it's something that some teachers get to and others don't. I mean, I'm sure they all read about King Casimir's or whatever in Polish books. Isn't there a structure, part of the structured program of teaching history, teaching the history of these Polish people?
Well, yeah, I do feel like that's not my area of expertise, but we do, on my trips we meet with a lot of scholars, and one of the scholars in Krakow, one of her fields of expertise is formal and informal education about the Holocaust, and she probably could also speak about not only the Holocaust, but Jewish history in general. And I could if you want, I could find out more for you if you want to see me after.
When groups go to Poland, do they ever go to schools to see what the, to converse with the children, to see whether there's
Groups in general or my groups?
your group? You can't speak about other groups, I assume.
I
Have
can.
you ever gone into a
actually.
school and actually talked about?
I've had students join my groups before. Those groups were groups of students. I had university groups, and I had Polish university students joining those groups.
But not younger.
No, I haven't done younger. That teacher that I mentioned is interested in maybe doing something with her students, but there are organizations that have Polish students looking into the Polish past of their towns.
Does your group utilize any of the discoveries of Father Dubois, his work?
No, I'm not from. Is that the
He's a
priest
French
that's
priest who
doing the Einsatzgruppen
Right,
research?
yeah, but
Oh,
maybe it's in the Ukraine more than in
Oh.
Poland.
yeah, I'm not familiar with I know in general, but not the details. No.
Yes, he's been finding the locations of where the Einsatzgruppen victims were buried,
Mhm.
and he has been interviewing people who are still alive, who are in their 80s and 90s, who were eyewitnesses. And some of the stories that he's uncovered, he's written a book and there's a movie about him, and then there was a TV special on, I think it was on 60 Minutes recently. And he continues that work, and the stories are absolutely amazing as to what actually went on when those Jews were being slaughtered in those villages, that the villagers themselves were witnessing it as though it were kind of a carnival type of atmosphere in certain instances. They marched to watch it.
So did that? I don't know if that got picked up by the mic, but yes, okay. As I said, we don't talk about that specifically, but we do talk a lot about Jedwabne. I don't know if you're familiar with Jedwabne. Is a place where the Jews of the town were burned alive. And it became very controversial when a book was written by Jan Tomasz Gross about it. And it's even controversial up till today in Poland. So that comes up a lot, and it's similar themes.
Controversial. I don't know enough to know.
So some people say that it was exaggerated what's written in the book. Is this just or is this just one place? Was this widespread or not? There's
Just a couple of remarks. I know that Tufts University was given $1 million about 5-6 years ago by Bill Cummings in Boston, and he gave $1 million to a Holocaust genocide. And this was, my husband was the second speaker for the second year of this, as an honorary speaker for this. And the place was packed. But it was packed not with Jewish people only, but everybody. And I was surprised at what you had mentioned, that they didn't, at the graduation for the honorary degree to this person, I'm surprised that they sort of mucked over it rather than doing a little more with that, because it's a very active group of people at Tufts. And for that kind of money, they do things, they do a lot of things. And the second thing is that when we were in the Ukraine, just when the wall fell from the Soviets, they were immediately put into a whole new idea of living. They had stores, they had sneaker stores in one of the cities from Nike or one of the companies in the United States. They had perfume stores, they had cosmetic places, whatever. But what intrigued me so much was that you could find, if we had people who someone we knew and we went to the rabbi, and he went to his people that he knew, and we went to the town hall. And my husband was able to get pictures of his mother and brother who were eliminated at one time, and his people and his grandmother. Because when they went to Vienna, they had to be documented. He said, here you go to Maine, you go. But there you don't go to places like Maine unless you have papers and your documents. And he got pictures of these people which we have now. So it is a little aside. And the last thing, and the very last, is that Bielski's son came to Boston to be you, and we met with him for a little bit. And he's a very interesting guy, and he mentioned his father and who his father was, and these were the brothers in Defiance. And he said his father was a wild guy, and he started a trucking company in New York, in Brooklyn. And as a result, he would think nothing of taking bears, say, animals. So one time, his son, just to be a wise guy, they opened the door, and he said, I have a surprise for you. And 6 baby bears went up into the apartment in Brooklyn. So these are the kind of things that, you know, it's interesting when you meet people like this who have had the experience of after the war. Because people wonder today, how am I going to find out about my family? It's right in the town hall, if you have the right people going to information.
Yeah, just to touch on one of the things you said, some people who go on the Bridge to Poland trips are interested in going to their ancestral towns, so I have connections with guides and historians that I can set you up with to go before or after a trip, and they can do research for you before or after.
Is there active Jewish life now in Poland?
Yeah, so we always go to, usually on the last night, to a Shabbat and a progressive Jewish community in Warsaw. There are 2 progressive Jewish communities in Warsaw, Krakow also. There's also a Orthodox community in both places. So there are people who have been Jewish the whole time and never left. There are people who discovered their Jewishness. There are people who kind of just have a hunch about it, you know, and then converted. There are people who, this is fewer people, but people who moved there, like I know, you know, an American and a few Israelis who moved to Poland, you know, Jews who moved there, so, yeah.
I was in Warsaw, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. There are a lot of Holocaust memorials throughout the world. There are a lot of Holocaust movies and books. What do you envision our great-grandchildren think about the Holocaust? Any idea?
Yeah, who knows? That's a little bit what I'm trying to do with, you know, what I was touching on, but it's really hard to know. And you're right, there's such a wide variety of things like that, you know, and you can talk about all the different categories, right? Movies, memoirs, monuments. Like that monument that I showed is one that I like. There are a lot of monuments that I don't particularly like, right? There's a monument to the pogrom in 1946. After the war, there was a pogrom in Kielce where more than 40 Jews were murdered based on a blood libel. The monument to that is a little perplexing to me. I don't really get the concept behind it, you know? So, and then some films, like there'll be a lot of criticism about the film, inauthentic, not portraying things the right way. I don't know, and will there be the interest? That's the point I was trying to bring up about if these things exist and no one accesses them, like if the tree falls in the forest and no one's there, right? So I guess we won't be...
In 1943, just on Aryan side, the ghetto was liquidated, the Jewish ghetto was liquidated, and all you could get, you deny still shooting. Individual people were found by Nazis, and they were chasing them, they were looking for hideout. You could hear shooting in ghetto side. I didn't stay long in Warsaw. Went to look for the guerrillas. They couldn't connect them, came back, they arrested me. And again in Warsaw, in the public jail, just then the ghetto was all empty. There was no more any Jews left in the ghetto.
Yeah, I heard you speak a few years ago, I remember, very interesting.
But then they shipped me from out to Auschwitz as a Roman Catholic. So,
Do you have any opinion about the Stolpersteine as monuments? What do you think of those?
I think so these are these stepping stones or stumbling stones in Germany that they have, like, it's like a brick that's like a brass color that has the name of a Jew or a Jewish family that lived in that particular place, and it's one artist's way of commemorating. I think that there are many different ways of commemoration, and that's one of them. Like, part of me likes it because it makes you stop and remember and think, and I think it's great that part of me doesn't like that maybe you step on it, but I have a cousin who's like, we have to get those in Poland. We have, and I'm like, I don't think we do. Tomek does. I mean, and different people in many different places in Poland are doing different things, and I think it's great that there are all different ways that people are commemorating. There's this concept of islands of memory, and they're all different islands of memory. It doesn't all have to be stepping stones. It doesn't all have to be the same. So
They're actually in other countries as well as Germany now.
oh, but not in Poland.
So, and I'm wondering how to put this in the following question, but thinking about remembering the people who were lost in those lives, but also there was this rich culture,
Right.
whether it was the golden age of Yiddish film or the Yiddish theater, and how do you, any thoughts about how you sort of remember what that rich culture was, not just what was lost, and how you sort of preserve?
Well, that's, I think, part of what the new museum, Poland, is trying to do. I mean, it's a lot of history, but there's also a cultural aspect. There are places like the National Center for Jewish Film that preserves Yiddish film.
That's what I was thinking.
And like on my trips, we have, I didn't talk about Vitek, who is also works at Brama Grodzka. He's like the second in command and also a very close friend of mine. And he does a performance of an Isaac Bashevish Singer play. So that's like bringing alive, that world, and that's very moving. And we also sing Yiddish songs and stuff. So those things are happening in different ways also. But yeah, it's important.
The German government is doing a lot more. Do you foresee that, like, the Polish government is going to do more to recognize their actions? Like, you've already addressed that, unlike the German government, they're not going to do as much in the schools.
I don't really know about schools, so don't, yeah.
Are they, also the German government is granting from blood lineage, passports to descendants.
So does
of
Poland.
Holocaust. How does one even go about doing that?
You can get Polish. Poland is very aware of its past. I wouldn't be that hopeful about the present Polish government, perhaps, but until now, Poland, I think, and especially this Poland museum it's this huge museum in the middle of Warsaw that, many school children are going to. There's a JCC right smack in the middle of Krakow. There are all these synagogues there. There are no guards at anything, and nothing ever happens. And but yeah, you can get Polish citizenship. If you want to see me after, I can send you the forms, but they're in Polish. You have to get them translated.
I was in the British Army in 1945 in Austria, just a few months after the war ended. And while I was there, I got to know a friend in Vienna whose Polish Jew, a bit hard, and we went back to Poland, and his wife and two children were murdered at Auschwitz, and he was in Vienna trying to get a visa to go to the US, but he'd been a member of the Communist Party, so as I was told him, you will now get a visa. So anyway, he went back to Poland. The interesting thing was that because he was a communist, the Polish government had arrested him, and he was in a prison camp in East Poland. If he'd not been arrested, he would have been in Auschwitz with his wife. So that's one, a lot of chance in these things. Then another, his sister-in-law had married a Jewish Austrian, I guess, who was a teacher in Yugoslavia. So she went to Yugoslavia with him before the war, and he was okay until the Germans occupied Yugoslavia, and then they buried up all the Jews. I mean, they weren't too casual about it. I mean, they really went looking for them. He didn't go to school teacher, he wasn't a politician. Anyway, you know, he was unlucky. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, it's, that's still an anecdote to say how much fortune played in it. If you were lucky, you could miss.
Well, that's true. My mother always says that luck, that people everybody who survived had luck and help. Those were two things that everybody who survived had.
They say that, I don't have the statistics, that a lot of the Polish Jews that survived were the ones that were deported to Russia, to labor camps and camps there, not concentration camps. Do you know anything about that? And
I don't know the
how the selection was
statistics,
made, who went to concentration camps versus who went to these labor camps in Russia?
I think that's true, but I don't know the statistics either. I can't say percentage, yeah.
But do you know how the process was determined, who went where? Or
some chose, like my great uncle went because he went there to see if that would be a better option for the family, and then he got stuck. Some were deported, Yeah, don't know.
I have from my father-in-law's archives a list of names of people who were relocated from Holocene in Poland to Russia who survived and then were moved back, and it tells which towns they were sent back to. And I donated it to Evo because I didn't recognize any names.
I think aren't there some new lists of, we were just at a Jewish genealogy conference, and I feel like there's some new information about people after the war who came back to Poland who went to the Soviet Union, but I don't remember the exact detail. Did you have a question?
I did. Well, I'd like to know how often do you live, how long do they last, and I'm touched and impressed that it sounds like your own evolution in terms of your career. It seems as though your life's work now is what your cause is, and I think that's wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do feel very passionate about all this stuff. I went to Poland in 2005 with my mother for the first time, and I had never really thought about going to Poland, or it wasn't on my radar screen at all, even though I love traveling and learning languages and had lived abroad in various places. But she invited me to go on the book tour when Dry Tears was translated into Polish, and that was my first introduction to, very briefly, Tomek and Vitek and some other people that were doing this amazing work. And I just was kind of intrigued, and then I went back 2 years later and really got to know them and the work, and was very, very moved, and I felt like I have to show this to people because it shows the potential for reconciliation and building bridges and hope, and it's just, I hope that you could see just from the couple of examples like the El Junia and the letters to Genio. Those are just the tip of the iceberg, really, of like the work that they do. So I feel like it's just such a positive message for humanity, and I see, especially with the students that I bring, that they see this and then they want to extrapolate to something else, black-white relations, Syrian refugee, like whatever it is. But everybody is moved. It doesn't matter if you're a student or not. A couple of times a year, there'll be the next open trip is next June, and that's going to be a 10-day trip. And I'm excited about that one because it's the first time I'm having, we meet with scholars on the trip, Polish scholars, and I have great connections because of my mom, and myself at this point. And I'm having a Holocaust scholar come on the whole trip, Michael Steinlauf, who's a great guy. He wrote a book called Bondage of the Dead. He's one. I was talking about the combination of head and heart, so he has that great combination, and he'll be with us the whole time. So I can talk to you more about it. I have a sign-up list back there too, so if you're interested at all, please sign it. I don't bombard with emails or newsletters. I should do more, in fact. You'll sign it and you'll go, why isn't she sending me anything? Okay, I think that's good for questions, and I'll be around if you want to come up individually. Thank you for coming.